Hi weaving friends, today's tutorial is all about how to make shapes on your loom using clasped weft. I have 3 other clasped weft videos for you to check out. I have one using 2 colors. That's sort of the overview basic tutorial of how to actually use the technique. So if you haven't seen it done before or you're not familiar with it, start with that video and I'll have it linked down below for you. And then the other 2, one of them is a triple clasped weft and the next one is a quadruple clasped weft. And I will link all of those videos down below in case you want to have a look at those as well. But I haven't covered specifically how to make shapes on your loom with clasped weft. And I really thought that it was worth covering because it's a lot of fun to do this. All you need to complete clasped weft is a 2-shaft loom, so a rigid heddle loom is perfect. You can do this on a table loom, you can do this on a floor loom, whatever you like. And I say a 2-shaft loom, but you can actually do clasped weft on more than 4 shafts, which gives a really beautiful effect. You'll see that here on the screen in my Cityscape scarf. This is available as a pattern download in my Etsy shop. I will link to that down below as well. But today I'm just doing mine on my little Sampleit loom. I know that some of you wanted to see it on a multi-shaft loom, but really the technique is exactly the same because all you're doing is changing between those shafts and you're interconnecting at the front with the wefts. Okay, so before we actually start the tutorial, I'm going to take you a brief overview of my setup. But as I said, if you haven't done the technique before, do look back at that first video that I have listed down below. And that will take you through it step by step. This is just going to be a quick overview of the setup before we get started on the shapes. I've got my rigid heddle loom here. It is warped up for plain weave. It's a little Sampleit loom which is perfect for just mucking around and trying out different techniques. I've got a little pair of scissors for snipping my threads, and I've got a stick shuttle loaded with the same color as my warp. Well, this one actually, it's not strictly the same color. My warp color is just a little bit darker, and this one's a little bit of a lighter navy. It's barely noticeable. And then on the floor, let's have a look right down here. On the floor, I've got my contrast yarn that I'm going to be using. So I have my regular weft yarn on the stick shuttle, and the contrast yarn, or the yarn that I'm going to introduce for the clasped weft, is sitting on the floor next to me. You can see up here that I've used yellow for the contrast yarn here. Now I'm changing to a different color just for fun. Now, just as a quick overview to the yarns that I'm using, and by the way, you can use a whole variety of yarns with this, so don't get too hung up on that. But what I'm using is a worsted weight wool in the warp. I've got a fingering weight wool in the weft, and as I said, it's a slightly different color, just a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to introduce an acrylic for the clasped weft. And that acrylic is about a DK weight, but it works with all kinds of yarns and all different weights of yarns. So you don't need all that many tools to get started with clasped weft, which is great. You don't need to put your contrast yarn on a shuttle. You just leave that in a ball or whatever format it is in, as long as it feeds off easily. I've also got my mug of herbal tea here, which is my attempt to wean myself off caffeine a little bit more so I can sleep better at night. So we'll see how that goes. But I've got my beautiful overshot mug. These are available in my Society 6 shop, and I'll have a link to that down below if you are interested. I better have a sip before we start. Ah, that is good. It's licorice tea. I don't usually like herbal teas, but this one is nice. All right, let's begin. My shuttle is on the right, so this is my main yarn on the shuttle, and I'm going to put my heddle into the down position. And by the way, you can start either on the right or the left. You just need to have your contrast yarn on the opposite side to the yarn that you're starting with your shuttle. So because I'm starting in the down shed, I actually want to step back just for a moment and put it in the up shed to bring in my contrast yarn, because as yet my contrast weft does not have a place. It hasn't been incorporated yet. So I'm going to take it in a few warp threads into the up shed like that, And then when I change to the down shed, it's now in the warp, it's part of it. The weft, I've already been using that, so it's already a part of the warp. Okay, so if you're familiar with Clasped Weft, you would know that we take this shuttle through and we make sure that the contrast yarn, the one that we're introducing, goes over that shuttle. So we take that right through the shed, and we want to fix up the edge just like we normally would. And then we don't change the shed, and we go straight back in with that same stick shuttle. And what happens is the new yarn gets drawn into the shed. So what you will have seen from my other Clasped Weft videos is that I usually do this a little bit randomly. Some picks I will make the contrast yarn be more of a feature. Some picks I will pare it back a little bit. It just depends. But what we want to do for this tutorial is we want to be specific about the placement of the yarns, because that is what allows us to put shapes into place where we want them. So if I'm going to do a diamond shape like I did down here, I want that contrast yarn to stop at a specific point. And because it's a diamond, I want it to stop at the middle of the warp as my kind of central point down the bottom of the diamond and work my way out from there. So an easy way of doing that without very much planning, which is what I like, is to grab your yarn pairs, so 2, 4, 6. So I'm grabbing the top and the bottom yarns, and I'm just going to keep going until I reach the middle. Okay, and so that shows me that this thread right here is the middle thread. So that's going to be my starting thread to begin with. Let's put a random pencil underneath that so we don't lose it. So when I bring my new contrast yarn in, even though it's sitting underneath that thread that I've selected, I know that I want it to stop around that point. Okay, so around there, take my pencil out, and then I can beat that. And then I have a starting point for my diamond shape. Okay, so on the next row, I'm going to do the same thing as far as what the shuttle does. Take through that main weft, pick up the contrast, fix my edge, and you do have to watch out for draw-in with Clasped Weft, because you've got yarns coming from both sides and they can really pull in on the sides of that warp. So just be careful about that. Now what I'm going to be looking at is the fact that I want this contrast yarn to start sort of moving outward to form the bottom of the diamond. And so I'm going to be looking a little bit more this time at this navy weft and seeing where my last navy pick went to. It went to here, and I want to go 1 or 2 warp threads beyond where that last went. So looking at them and going 1 or 2 beyond. So let's say that it's that thread, and I'm positioning my navy underneath that thread. Okay, and then I'm going to beat that. Then I change sheds, so I'm back in the down position. I'm going to take my shuttle through, pick up the contrast, fix my edge, and then go to draw back in. So for this pick, I'm going to be looking more at the light blue. I want to see where my last light blue pick was when I was in the down shed. And it was my first pick and it finished here. So I want to move about 2 warp threads beyond my last one. So I'm going to position that a little bit beyond and beat that. Now I'm back into the up shed, and I'm thinking of this as like a blue, dark blue pick. Okay, making sure that I pick up my contrast yarn and then back into the shed. So now I'm looking at my blue, and I can see that the last pick was about here. So I want to go a couple of picks beyond that and take my blue navy yarn to about that warp thread. Back into the down shed, pick up that contrast, fix up my edge, and then go back in. Now I'm looking at the light blue again, and I see here my last pick showed up on this warp thread, so I'm going to go 2 beyond that. Back into the back into the up shed. Now I'm focusing on my navy. So I'm going back in. I'm looking at where my last navy pick showed up, and it showed up on this warp thread, so I'm going 2 beyond that. And that is about where I want my navy to go to. So you can see here now, I've got them interlinked, and I'm going to stop them linking right here because I'm looking at where the navy last went to, and I want to go 2 warp threads beyond that towards the left. Back into the down shed again, which I think of as the light blue shed or the contrast shed. So I'm looking at that contrast yarn. I can see here this was the last pick that showed, so I'm going 1, 2 beyond that. And I'm going to have my contrast yarn showing underneath that pick, underneath that thread. Into the up position again for a navy shed, going through, picking up my contrast. Okay, let's have a look at where our navy was last showing. On the left, it was here, so I'm going to go 2 beyond that to this thread. Okay, so I want my navy to go about to there, and then into the down shed. And that's our contrast thread shed, coming through, taking it back. So I'm looking at where my last contrast pick was showing. It was on this thread, so I'm going to count 2 out from that. The way that I'm counting them, that with the 2 warp threads and so on, that's just the way I'm doing it. I'm not saying that that's the way you have to do it. I just like the kind of diamond shape that it builds, doing 2 warp threads at a time, moving that out. You can move out 1 at a time, you can move out 3 at a time. You can feel free to experiment and do your own thing. This is just one way to do it. So I'm taking my contrast yarn to that thread that I've marked out. It's 2 threads away. And then into the up shed. So now you can see the bottom of the diamond is forming. On the right hand, we've got our navy weft. On the left hand, we've got our contrast weft. And the shape of the diamond is forming in the middle as those 2 colours merge. Now, I'm going to make my diamond a little bit larger than this, but you could stop here and start going back in, working your way in if you wanted a smaller diamond. I want mine a little bit bigger. So I'll go through on the up shed. I will take that back in. So I'm focusing on the navy now, and the last navy showed on this thread. So I'm going to count 1, 2 out towards the left, and that takes it to right there. Back into the down shed or the contrast thread shed. Pick that up. Now I'm looking at my contrast thread, my nice blue. Last pick showed here, so I'm counting out 1, 2, and there we go. Taking it to there. Up shed. Taking through underneath the contrast yarn. So I'm looking at the navy this time. let's see where my last navy thread went to, just here. So I'm counting out 1, 2. Beat. I think the bottom of my diamond is almost big enough, so I'm going to change in a moment and start taking the shape back inwards. But I'm going to do another contrast shed first. So looking at my light blue contrast, it last showed here on this thread, so I'm going to count out 1, 2 and make it go to there. All right, time to start moving back in. So we're in the navy shed now, the up shed. I'm going to go around my contrast yarn and back in. So the difference this time is I can see my last navy pick was here, and instead of moving out 1, 2, I'm going to move in 1, 2. Okay, so that's going to be my thread that I'm going to take my navy to now before I beat, and that will start moving the shape inwards. So from now on we're thinking inwards instead of outwards. My contrast shed, don't forget to pick up the contrast yarn, take that back in. Now I'm looking at my last contrast pick, which showed here, and I want to move, instead of out 2, I want to move into. So that's where I'm going to. Now, if you get something like what I just did, and that is that I've got my last contrast weft showing here, but it looks like it should be going a little bit further than this. It's cutting in too much on the angle of the diamond. All you have to do to change that is to open the same shed again and just rearrange it and do it by eye like that. Now it's more pleasing because it's not at such an angle. And then I can change sheds. So it's very, very easy to go back and change something that you don't like, as long as you haven't woven too far ahead. Now we're in the up shed, so I'm focusing on the navy thread. Let's have a look. Last navy thread was here. So I'm going to count in 1, 2. I want my navy to go to about there. Into the down shed or the contrast shed. Back through. Looking at where my last contrast thread was and counting in 1, 2. So I want to take it to there. And then go up. Take it through. Pick up the contrast thread. Take it back. Look at where my last navy was. Where are we? Here. And move in 1, 2. Then into the down shed. Go through. Go back after picking up the contrast yarn. Looking where my last contrast yarn was showing, so we want to go in 1, 2 and have it stop about there. Back into the up shed. Take it through underneath the contrast yarn. Take it back. Look at where my last navy weft was showing, which was here. So I want to count in 1, 2. So now I can see at the top here that I've got a little more contrast showing here when I'd rather it be showing over here. So I go back, loosen up the threads and just put that where I would rather it be, so that the diamond looks a bit more complete because it then has a top and a bottom point. You can keep going with that if you want a bit more of a point with it, just by eyeballing it and seeing where you want that last pick to be looking at. Okay, so now we've got a pretty nice diamond shape going there. Now I want to show you another design feature, because what you could keep doing is just start another diamond all over again and keep going. I like to alternate the colors on the sides, because then you get what I did with the yellow down here, which is I alternated the yellow to this side after doing it on this side initially, and it's really, really effective. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. To swap the sides, you can cut the contrast yarn, and you're going to move it to the other side. So you want to move your ball that's on the floor and put that on the other side of you. And with the yarn that's already there, which shed were we in? Okay, so we're in the up shed. I'm going to just tuck the tail of that contrast yarn in, and I'm going to take my weft. I'm not going to detach this shuttle weft. I'm just going to take it through to the other side. So that was an up shed. And while I've got that up shed, I'm going to introduce the new yarn as I did initially on the other side by putting it in a few warp threads deep, and then I can change to the down shed and we're ready to start weaving again. So everything is just the same, but we've changed the weft colors sides, that's all. So instead of picking up the contrast yarn from the left now, you'll be picking it up from the right. So I'll take my shuttle through and then back. And you can either go back and find that central point over again, or you can start your new diamond in a similar trajectory to where the last diamond was going, just by eyeballing it. So if I look at the angle of this last diamond, naturally the next thread that I would be having the contrast showing at would be this one, which is a down shed thread, but that's okay. I can make the blue show there just by having it in that gap and beating it in. So now you can see it lines up fairly well with the last one. And then into the up shed, take that shuttle through, pick up the contrast, and then back through. So now I want to be looking at my navy thread and see where my last navy pick was. It was here. And so I want to be counting 1, 2 to the right and position that thread about where that thread is. Okay, into the down shed, which is a contrast shed. Go underneath the contrast yarn and then back into the shed. So I'm going to be looking at where my last contrast yarn ended, and it ended at this one. So I'm going to be counting 1, 2 to the left to reposition it. So when I say that I'm looking for the last contrast row, it's actually 2 rows ago, because the last row that I did, I was focusing on the navy. The row before that I was focusing on the contrast yarn. And so I want to alternate between focusing on the navy row and on the contrast row. Okay, into up, take the shuttle through, pick up the contrast yarn, go back in. So this is my navy shed I'm going to be focusing on. Let's have a look where my last navy thread was, down here. So I'm going to move it 2 to the right. Okay, so lining up my navy with that thread and then beating and then down, go through, pick up the contrast yarn, go back, Now this is a contrast row, so we're going to have a look on the last contrast row, which was here, where the thread was showing. It was showing here, so I'm going to be going 1, 2 to the left. So think of it as working the diamond outwards at the moment. And up. So this is a navy row. Going back. Now I'm looking at where my last navy row was, underneath this one, and it was showing here, so I'm going to be going 1, 2 to the right. Marking that one. And then down. And again, this is going to be the contrast row. So I'm going to have a look at my last contrast row, which was here. That was my last place where it was showing as part of my diamond moving out towards the left. And I'm going to count 1, 2. Then into the up shed, or my navy shed. Taking that through, going back. Okay, so let's focus on the navy. This was my navy row here, and this is where it last showed. So I'm going to count 1, 2 out to the right, building the shape outwards. Now in the down shed, so my contrast row and back. So where was my contrast last showing? Over here. I'm going to count out 1, 2 to there. The up shed, my navy shed. Hopefully this will get you thinking about all the different shapes and designs you could do using this method. Okay, my last navy pick was here. So I'm going to count 1, 2 to the right and have my navy finish up just there. Down. Again, my contrast row. And back. Looking at where my last contrast row ended and counting out by 2. Up, my navy row, back in. Where did my last navy row end? Over here, and it's traveling to the right, so 1, 2 threads to the right, and I'm going to stop it there. Now as for, actually, you can see that didn't go quite far enough. I want that to go a little bit further. Good. As for how broad you make your shape, again, you can just copy what you've done down here. Wait until your shape is as broad as it was here and then change it. Or another idea would be that you could change it early so it was a more narrow diamond. So you could have a larger diamond and a narrow diamond, then a larger diamond, and alternate that way. Or you can make them exactly the same. I'm just going to make mine exactly the same for this tutorial. Now I'm looking at my contrast, which ended here, going out 2. And then up for my navy row, take it through and back, and check out where my last navy row ended here, so 1, 2 over here. Going into the down shed. Now I think maybe I have about the same width. I can check the rows, so I can go 1 by counting the contrast rows that I've already done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've done the same amount. That means if I want them the same size, I'm going to start working my way back in. So I'm on my contrast row. I'm looking at where my last contrast was, and because I want to go back in now, I'm going to count 2 warp threads to the right instead of the left like I have been. Too far. Too far. So I will just make that go a little bit further. You see my last one was showing here. That means I want my next one to show here rather than here where I had it showing. That's better. And this is the navy row. So I'm going to look over to my navy where it was last showing here, and I'm going to make it go in 2 warp threads. To there. I pulled that one a little bit far in. And then the down shed, so my contrast row. Back in, looking at where my last contrast one was and counting in 2. Again, that seems a little bit far for me, so I will bring it across just a little bit more. There's so much of this can just be eyeballed. Now my navy. Let's see, my navy was there, so I'm going to go into about here with that. Now my contrast. Okay, last contrast was here and going in by 2 or eyeballing it so that it looks right to me. Yep. So we're really moving back in with the diamond now. Last navy weft was here, so I'm going to move it to about here. Now my contrast. Last contrast was showing here. So I want the next one to just move in a little bit. Maybe a little bit more than that. You get to decide. Okay, the navy, moving it back in. Contrast. We're just about done. If you want to be really precise, you can count up all your rows and make sure that you're doing them exactly the same each time. Navy in. Okay, I might do one more row. You can see I'm very close to needing to advance my warp here. Okay, and the last one, we'll have that as the top of the diamond. And there we go. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share with your friends, and also pop over and check out the online weaving school for lots of great classes. Until next time, happy weaving. Hi weaving friends, today's tutorial is all about how to make shafts. Oh dear. Try again.